Herzlich willkommen zurück zu unserem Abschluss der Konferenz. Zum Abschlusspanel ist jetzt auch Maude Barlow dazugeschaltet, gleich nach dem Frühstück. Guten Morgen, Maude. Wir dürfen jetzt auch noch Raffaele Morgantini.
Good morning to you.
Hello. Wir dürfen jetzt auch noch Raffaele Morgantini von CETIM begrüßen. Raffaele, schön, dass du auch mit dabei bist. Am besten stellst du dich und CETIM gleich selbst vor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay, so first of all, thank you very, very much for the organization of this very important event, very punctual indeed, on such a crucial issue for the future of our societies. And thank you very much for the invitation also. So my name is Raffaele Morgantini and I work for CETIM, which stands for Centre Europe Tiers-Monde in French, Europe Third World Center. CETIM is an organization, research center focused on the mechanism at the origin of what we call the world's misdevelopment. And on one hand, we contribute with studies, researches on fundamental topics, as, for example, the functioning of the neoliberal globalization, and more in general about issues related to the problems at the origin of the third world, so-called underdevelopment. And on the other hand, we work as an interface between social movements from the global south and international mechanism in Geneva, mainly at the UN level. And at the UN level, we work in favor of the elaboration of new international human rights norms. And for example, we have been very active and participating in the international negotiation process that led to the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, which is of interest, I think, and perfectly fits for today's discussion. And so I think I will have the opportunity to speak a little bit more about this issue. And thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Raffaele. Wir kommen auf die UNDROP auf jeden Fall zu sprechen noch. Ich würde mit einer Frage an Christian und Maude starten, die nochmal anschließt an das, was wir gestern und auch heute Morgen noch besprochen haben, und zwar die Frage des Eigentums. Warum ist die Frage des Eigentums so zentral, wenn wir einen anderen Stoffwechsel zwischen Mensch und Natur entwickeln wollen? Ihr müsstet euch einigen, wer zuerst antworten möchte. Am besten mit Hand heben.
Ja. Soll ich beginnen? Ja?
Okay.
Soll ich jetzt auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch sprechen?
Gerne auch auf Deutsch, einfach relativ langsam, okay. Und wir müssen die Zeitverzögerung einkalkulieren.
Ja, weil die Eigentumsfrage natürlich direkt mit der Frage verbunden ist, wer die Produktion kontrolliert. Was wird, wo, warum, für wen, für welchen Zweck, auf welche Weise produziert. Diese Entscheidung ist direkt mit dem Eigentum verbunden. Und wenn wir wollen, dass all diese Fragen, die ich jetzt gerade genannt habe, was, wo, wie, warum, für wen, auf welche Weise, wenn das auf eine demokratische Weise entschieden werden soll, auch in der landwirtschaftlichen Produktion, das gilt aber für jede Art von Produktion oder von Dienstleistungserstellung, dann ist das zwingend verbunden mit einer kooperativen Form des Eigentums. Also das ist eine sehr grundsätzliche Antwort. Weil, so wie kapitalistische Produktionsweise funktioniert, natürlich mit dem Eigentum über die Maschinerie, über das Saatgut auch die Kontrolle und die Entscheidung verbunden ist. Und ich glaube nicht, dass es möglich ist, diese Fragen, also das zu trennen. Ja? Wenn wir demokratische, kooperative Entscheidungsprozesse wollen, müssen wir die Eigentumsfrage direkt ansprechen.
Vielen Dank. Maude, möchtest du dazu etwas ergänzen?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I'm just following the instructions and turning the translation off because for technical reasons. So it's just a pleasure to be with you again. My perspective is very much, of course, in keeping with that of all the panelists, but coming from the perspective of water. And my many-year fight has been to stop the commodification, privatization, and financialization of water, to move to the future that we need for food sovereignty, for regenerative agriculture, for the vision that we all share on this panel and in this movement. We have to ensure safe, accessible water for all, and particularly for small-scale farmers. We cannot have large corporations coming in and owning and controlling water, and that's been a lifetime of struggle for me. I briefly mentioned yesterday in my speech, or my earlier remarks, that there's privatization of water services municipally. There's the privatization of water through land grabs and water, which are water grabs, mining companies, foreign mining companies getting huge concessions to water for 30, 40, 50 years. They can do whatever they want to it. That's a form of privatization. There's the commodification of water through water trading. And I talked briefly about my concern in 3 countries, Chile, Australia, and the United States, but it's really a movement that's growing and worrying me very much. And then the most recent is the financialization of water, which is the speculation, the opening up of the speculation on water futures, which is you're not even gambling or betting or investing, so-called, in actual water. It's you're betting on drought, you're betting on crisis, and you're trying to lock in water assets at a certain level so that you can sell them at a higher price. And I think it's an extraordinarily dangerous process, and one that where our movement is fighting very hard. We need laws everywhere to stop the commodification and privatization of water. I just want to commend, I know Lisa Krebs has been involved in this event this weekend. Switzerland has brought in Blue Communities Project in many, I think 30 some municipalities, universities, labor unions, and so on that have pledged to maintain water as a public trust. And it's really important that we use that language. I just want to warn us against a trend that I'm seeing, and that is the formalization, the codification of language in many places, at the UN, at the World Bank, of course, with major environmental groups like Nature Conservancy, to bring nature into the market. They're calling nature natural capital, natural assets. Canada's just launched a project where they've hired all these scientists and environmentalists to calculate the natural assets so that you can prove that nature matters. Well, for heaven's sake, we don't need a dollar sign on nature to prove that it works, but it's basically saying we're not going to critique capitalism. We're not going to critique the market. We're not going to critique economic globalization. We're not going to critique deregulation. What we're going to do is continue the growth imperative, but we're going to bring nature into the equation and let the economists take care of it. And there's a major new review report in the UK, the United Kingdom, called the Dasgupta Review. And if anyone is interested, I can get the organizers a very, very powerful critique of this review. Dasgupta Review is basically going to set the environmental tone for Great Britain for many years. When it was launched about a month ago, the Prince of Wales was there, the Prime Minister was there, David Attenborough, the famous filmmaker, wonderful environmentalist, said that it proved that it's economists, not ecologists, who are going to help us save the planet. And it's really a dangerous, in my opinion, it's a really dangerous trend, but it's all wrapped up in the language of nature-based solutions to the climate crisis. And I just think we need to be very aware. I'm hearing very little criticism or critique from around this from environmental groups. Even smart environmental groups are just kind of buying into this. And I think it's dangerous, and I want to, it's the water part of it, but it's all about nature. And I don't know how we move to a regenerative food production system with that kind of model. It's just only going to support and empower large agribusiness, export-oriented food production, and all of the things that we all know attend that. So the fight to stop the commodification of nature, the fight to stop the commodification of water, is absolutely an essential one.
Deshalb ist die Frage des Eigentums in der Tat zentral für die weitere Debatte. Tammi, du betonst, dass es in der engen Zusammenarbeit zwischen Produzentinnen und Konsumentinnen auch um Wissensvermittlung geht. Daher veranstaltest du ja auch regelmäßig Workshops, zum Beispiel zur Fleischverarbeitung. Warum ist Wissen über die Produktion von Lebensmitteln zunächst auf Seiten der Konsumentinnen wichtig, wenn wir die Landwirtschaft grundlegend anders organisieren wollen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, agroecology generally supports the idea that agriculture is labor intensive, should not be capital intensive, and knowledge intensive. And generally speaking, in food sovereignty world and a better life for everyone, the more knowledge we all have, the more literacy we have around growing food, processing food, cooking, sharing it with our families. We're also very committed here to 3 meals a day at our table. And that's something that happens every single day here, no matter what the workload is. And we teach others just that skill when they come for workshops, that you sit down and you eat together, and it gives more meaning to the growing and the cooking of the food too. So I think empowering society to be able to take these things back into control. We say we want them to have control, but if they don't know what to do with the broccoli once they've got it, then what point is it? So yeah, I think growing more knowledge across society is really critical to the transition we need.
Vielen Dank. Rückfrage an Christian. Wissen ist auch allgemein gesprochen auf Seiten der Produzentinnen doch wichtig, oder? Es muss ja eben darum gehen, du hattest es am Anfang gesagt, dass die Menschen die Lebensmittel erzeugen, verteilen und konsumieren, die Entscheidung darüber, was, wo, wie und von wem produziert wird, sich auch aneignen. Vielleicht kannst du das noch mal kurz ausführen. Und warum ist es wichtig, nicht nur für die Verteilung von Gebrauchsgütern, sondern auch für den gesellschaftlichen Stoffwechsel mit der Natur?
Zielt jetzt die Frage noch auf das Wissen ab, also die Aneignung von Wissen, oder?
Genau, Aneignung von Wissen auf Seiten der Produzentin jetzt, nicht nur auf Seiten der Konsumentin, über was Tammi gesprochen hatte, sondern warum sollten die Produzentinnen auch?
Okay. Ja, wie wir jetzt vorhin auch gehört haben, also im Zusammenhang mit dem Wasser, gibt es die Tendenz einer Kommodifizierung oder eines Prozesses des Zu-Ware-Machens von allem, ja? Also von Wasser, von natürlichen Ressourcen jeglicher Art. Und dieselbe Tendenz gibt es ja auch bei Wissen, also das Zu-Ware-Machen von Wissen in Form von Patenten. Und wenn das geschieht, erlangen natürlich diejenigen, die die Eigentümer und Eigentümerinnen sind der Patente, erlangen die Kontrolle darüber, was mit diesem Wissen gemacht wird. Sie können es parkieren, Sie können es auslizenzieren, Sie können Geld damit machen, Sie können aus dem Patent ein Wertpapier machen, was auch immer Sie machen wollen. Und letztlich ist, glaube ich, wichtig, dass die Produzentinnen und Produzenten, die lokalen Gemeinschaften selber auch wieder in der Lage sind, nicht nur selber zu produzieren, sondern sich natürlich auch das Wissen, das Erfahrungswissen, aber auch das akademische Wissen, auch Forschungswissen, sich anzueignen und selber zu kontrollieren. Und da finde ich, das, was jetzt, glaube ich, gerade Tammi gesagt hat, finde ich ganz wichtig, dass die Landwirtschaft arbeits- und wissensintensiv sein soll, aber nicht kapitalintensiv. Das ist ein ganz wichtiger Sachverhalt. Das eröffnet dann die Piste oder den Weg, darüber nachzudenken, wie das konkret geschehen soll. Das heißt aber natürlich auch, dass wir die landwirtschaftliche Tätigkeiten interessant gestalten müssen, dass wieder mehr Menschen in der Landwirtschaft und der Erzeugung von Lebensmitteln arbeiten. Das wird ohnehin notwendig sein, weil wir in vielen anderen industriellen Bereichen genau den gegenteiligen Prozess haben, dass wir nämlich viele Arbeitsplätze freisetzen. Also beispielsweise, wenn wir die Rüstungsindustrie abschaffen oder wenn wir die Automobilindustrie nahezu abschaffen, dann werden da sehr viele Arbeitsplätze nicht mehr dort sein. Das ist ganz klar. In der Landwirtschaft brauchen wir aber viele neue Arbeitsplätze. Und da stellt sich dann letztlich auch wieder die Frage darüber, wer letztlich das ganze System letztlich kontrolliert.
Vielen Dank. Jetzt gibt es erste Fragen aus dem Chat. Ich gebe kurz an Christine weiter.
Genau, und zwar knüpfen wir an gestern Abend an. Yesterday, the last question was, and we didn't have time anymore to follow up on it. somebody said realistically up to 2030 we will and cannot stop the industrial meat production. But we have the international framework and pledge of Agenda 2030. Through a fair ecological and social framework, we must strengthen the options of the small farmers, ecological and fair production, and new consumer pattern. And through that, we must enhance a fair contest. And here, he asks specifically, Dear Maude, how can the parallel 3 positive approaches and concepts be best linked to reach our goals? 1, the just mentioned Agenda 2030, goal number 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of the water and sanitation for all. 2, the UN resolution on water and sanitation. And 3, the adoption and reawakening of the public trust doctrine on water and the commons.
Well, wonderful questions. And I'm going to just wait a minute, so I don't get echo coming back. Yeah, thank you so much for this. And what a wonderful and rich discussion we're having. I think it's so important, and I'm so grateful to bring the water perspective into the food discussion, the food sovereignty discussion. Yeah, we fought very hard to get water and sanitation recognized as fundamental human right. And that finally happened in 2010 at the United Nations General Assembly. I actually thought we were going to lose. Most major English-speaking neoliberal countries, my own included, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Australia, they all opposed the human right to water, as did the World Bank, as did all the major water companies, all the utilities, the bottled water companies, the big food companies. Everybody was on a place where they were going to marketize water and put it on the open market for sale. And this was just going to put a spammer in the works, if you will. But we won. Well, 121 countries voted in favor. Not one voted against. They abstained. 42 countries abstained, which was just appalling. But at least they didn't vote against. And we now have 4 dozen countries around the world that have either amended their constitution or adopted some form of law recognizing water as a human right. And as I said in my talk, I think it's really important that we understand this isn't just a nice phrase. It's a different way of looking at this. If water is a need that can be filled by charity or welfare within a country, that's one thing. If it's a human right and it's a fundamental human right, that's a different thing. And it changes the way we look at it. And bringing in the human rights perspective to what is a fundamental human right is incredibly important. And then that in turn leads to the kind of laws and policies that we implement. Public trust is absolutely crucial. We are not going to save the world's water. We are a planet running out of clean, accessible water. And don't get me started. You'll have to get a lamb hook and get me off of here, because I get so passionate about it. But we're not going to be able to protect the world's water if it is owned and controlled by market forces. They're not immoral, they're not moral, they're amoral. It's the dead hand of the market, and it cannot look after the human right to water or the needs of small-scale farmers and the needs of a world in many ways in danger of collapse. So yes, the fundamental principle of public trust is absolutely essential, and we are fighting that in many, many parts of the world. We're also fighting the financialization, the move to to put the water futures on the table, and we have a whole coalition and network coming together to fight that in North America, where it started. So yes, any way that people can move to undo. I was just talking to Tammi earlier. For Australia, needs to undo its water markets, water sailing, water rights sales regime in order for it, in my opinion, in order for Australia to be able to truly enter a public trust future for water.
Ich schließe mal mit einer Frage an für Raffaele, und zwar geht es um die UNDROP. Wenn man dieses UN-Menschenrecht auf Wasser nutzen kann auch, und Maude beschreibt das in ihren Büchern immer wieder, dass man zum Beispiel nationale Gerichte dazu erfolgreich gegen Verträge mit Privatunternehmen vorgehen konnte mit Hilfe dieses UN-Rechtes. Gibt es ähnliche Beispiele für diese UN-Deklaration der Rechte der Kleinbäuerinnen, also als Druckmittel diese UNDROP zu nutzen, um Dinge tatsächlich zu verbessern für Kleinbäuerinnen?
Yes. So thanks for the question. Maybe before, let me start by saying some important elements about the adoption of the UNDROP, because I think it's very important to underline the fact that the UNDROP constitutes really a huge step forward in legal terms, because for the first time, peasants' rights are internationally recognized as human rights. And in that sense, there is no going back. So now they are there, and there is only to go forward. Because now peasants' rights are part of the corpus of human rights law and constitute today the cornerstone of peasants' rights. And so a concrete instrument that peasants, smallholder farmers can claim, can refer to when advocating for the respect and promotion of their fundamental rights. And it's also important to remember that, of course, the declaration today is a normative framework, but I think it's key to keep in mind that, first of all, the UNDROP, it was an idea coming out of a need, and the need to develop a kind of shield against the spread of neoliberalism as the unique model of the development also in the rural areas, right? Unique model of development that resulted in privatization, liberalization of agricultural markets, speculation, land grabs, and in peasants no longer having control over processes and tools, right? And so really the UNDROP is, it was initiated as a reaction to the inability of peasants to meet their own needs in this international system that benefits the agribusiness sector. And now if we want to push for the realization of the rights that are enshrined in the UNDROP, we need to push, first of all, for an appropriation of the UNDROP. And this really could contribute to the long-standing struggle for social, ecological transformation of agriculture. So you asked me how it could be concretely used in order to protect the rights of peasants, of small-scale farmers. Let's take, for example, the article on the right to seeds, because, for example, there the UNDROP directly tackles the challenge of right to seeds for peasants. The right to seeds is enshrined in Article 19 of the UNDROP, and I think that along with the right to land, it's one of the most, I would say, radical and revolutionary rights there, because as you all know, the privatization of seeds for the benefit of large industrial and commercial enterprises has deprived peasants of work that is, how can I say, intrinsic to their raison d'être. I don't know if we can say this in English, I think so. And even worse, it has also brought an impoverishment of crop varieties and thus an impoverishment of ecosystems and our diet. Okay, and now how, like Christian said about the issue of patents, now with Article 19, peasants have now the freedom of choice as to farming methods, and thus, by implication, they have the right to reject industrial methods, and so industrial farming shouldn't have the right to impose patents on seeds. Now, the challenge here is that each domestic law should be reviewed in the light of the declaration. So, for example, on seeds, every national legislation should be revisited in the light of the declaration. How to do that? Well, civil society, rural organization should keep an eye on the situation of peasants in all sectors and for all issues, and made assessments and concrete proposals to fill the gaps between the national level legal instrument and the standards that are set by the declaration. And for example, we could think about a law on seeds in a country that is prohibiting the exchange of farm seed between peasants, and this would contravene Article 19 of the UN draft on the right to seeds, and so that article can then either be invoked to demand the repeal or amendment of the law, or be taken as a basis for a new one. And so rural organization and their allies could thus develop concrete proposals for authorities on a way of better implementing peasants' rights. And so, but generally speaking, now we have to keep in mind that the declaration is setting legislative standards and at various levels. And there are specific examples that demonstrates that the implementation process is well underway. And for example, at the national level, the declaration is starting to being used in ongoing legal proceedings in some countries to protect the rights of peasant communities. And at the international level, we can see that especially at the UN draft is being used as a reference by UN human rights mechanism. And so we have to continue to push to increase this dynamic. And this is the only way to make this a reality and to see the content of the UN draft transposed in national legislation, because this is, at the end, this is what we need, because otherwise the UN draft will stay a dead letter in the UN closet, right? So in order to really help peasants, small scale farmers in their daily lives, we need new national legislation that are inspired from the declaration. And so we are working on this.
Sehr gut. Ein kurzer Kommentar noch dazu. Das wird ja dann die Herausforderung sein, zum Beispiel bei Freihandelsverträgen, ob dann das nationale Recht verhindern kann, dass zum Beispiel über TRIPS Plus die Privatisierung von Saatgut vorangetrieben wird. Aber das wird man sehen müssen. Dann wird man sehr genau beobachten müssen, was passiert. Jetzt kommt eine Frage aus dem Chat.
Ja, genau. Und also es sind mehrere Fragen da, aber ich würde gerne thematisch gerade an Raffaele anschließen. And it's not only for Raffaele, I think. It will be also for Tammi and the others as well, probably. The UN Food Systems Summit is heading. What fundamental system changes should be discussed there?
Can I just say that
jemand noch kurz ergänzen, was der World Food Summit ist und ja.
Most of the civil society organizations of the world have boycotted the entire process because it's being co-opted by corporate interests. And so the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, La Via Campesina, all the food sovereignty alliances in the world, in the US, Australia, Africa, all of us have chosen not to participate because essentially, if we did participate in a process that's being directed by multinational corporations, they would be focus grouping us to find what language they'd like to use to convince the world that they're doing the right thing. So we don't think it should be happening the way it is. It should have happened under the mandate of the Food and Agriculture Organization or the Committee for Food Security, and had a mandate that had democratic representation from civil society. And since it doesn't, instead, we're organizing alternatives, as has happened before.
Raffaele, you are in Geneva. You are close to the UN. What is your point of view? Or what are your plans? What is CETIM's plans?
Yes, I very much agree with what Tammi said about it. Because ideally, we as CETIM, we would have loved to be part of the preparation of the summit on such an important subject, right? And to contribute to the realization of the summit, participate in its deliberation. but unfortunately, we really witnessed a shift in the form that took the preparation of the summit, which obliged us, but not only us, I think all of our movements and organizations to rethink our attitude and to fight back actually an event that turned its back to the initial objective and spirit, because as Tammi said, it's really worrying in witnessing how agribusiness lobbies are capturing the summit and orienting the preparation and objectives, because it's a multilateral. Let's not forget that this is a multilateral space that should be oriented by the search of public interest, right? And in that sense, could really constitute an opportunity to try to find solutions to reinforce our food system, to make them more sustainable and resilient. So we have really witnessed the influence of transnational agribusiness corporation and also experts, so-called experts that are actually being known for being defenders of industrial agriculture, and of course with the support of powerful states that are really, and this group of entities are really fashioning the summit content, allowing finally the agribusiness sector to orient the summit in accordance with its strategic commercial interest, and also to legitimate itself as the leader and the architect of our food system. And but it's also, I think it's worth recalling that the summit is actually the result of a joint initiative between, from on one side, the United Nations Secretary General, but on the other side with the World Economic Forum, right? Which is, everybody knows what the World Economic Forum is. It's the hub of the initiatives seeking the commodification and financialization of productive sectors and natural resources, including, of course, food system. And now we really see that the summit seems concentrating exclusively on approach of food system based on market solution, and really is ignoring, it's omitting completely solutions coming from peasant food systems. For example, I'm thinking about agroecology solutions that are totally absent from the debates. Agroecology we all know, is a key concept that seeks an ecologic balance within rural areas and the general development of societies, and as well as a vehicle of social justice and empowerment of local communities. Tammi explained that in the previous session, right? And yeah, this concept is also, going back to the UN drop, is also enshrined in the UN drop, and also the UN drop is totally absent from the debates of this summit. And while it ideally should be at the core, placed at the heart of it, as I would say a reference document, for me the UN drop really constitute a kind of common roadmap to drive our societies, and in particular our food systems, towards a recovery from the current pandemic and through and towards a more sustainable and resilient food system. So yeah, what is happening with the food summit, I think it's serious and it's very problematic, but it reflects the balance of power at the international level and the monopolization of food system by the big and very powerful agribusiness sector.
Es gibt eine Anschlussfrage im Chat.
Genau, und zwar, und nachher glaube ich, kannst du gar keine Fragen mehr stellen, weil da sind die dann zu viert unterwegs. Zwei Fragen, also drei eigentlich, aber jetzt genau in diesem Zusammenhang ist, wie sind die Landwirte untereinander vernetzt und wie arbeiten sie mit ähnlichen Betrieben, zum eben sich austauschen und Kraft zu haben? Und die andere Frage ist, und ich wechsle die Sprache, weil die ist auf Englisch, which ways does the panel see and propose to build up enough pressure in order to achieve a system change, i.e. how to activate larger parts of our society.
Ich glaube, die erste Frage ist an Tammi und ich würde an die letzte Frage von dir meine Frage noch anschließen, weil die mir auch wichtig ist. Eine Frage an Maude, aber eigentlich auch an alle. Und zwar bei den Communities ist es ja gelungen, zunächst auf lokaler, dann aber auch globaler Ebene, dass ganz unterschiedliche Bewegungen, Organisationen, Institutionen, Bürgerrechtsbewegungen, NGOs, kirchliche Organisationen, Universitäten und Gewerkschaften zusammengearbeitet haben. Wie ist euch das gelungen? Und warum ist die Zusammenarbeit, das wäre eine Frage auch nochmal an alle, verschiedener sozialer Bewegungen und Gruppierungen wichtig im Hinblick auf den System Change? Aber zunächst die Frage an Tammi, Zusammenarbeit ähnlicher Betriebe, wie du ihn führst, in Australien, aber auch global wahrscheinlich.
A lot. So farmers are increasingly mobilized, small-scale farmers across the world, whether you're in the global north or the global south. You saw what happened in India over the last 6 months. You know, you've seen mobilizations like we've never seen before, certainly not in a very long time. And even in Australia, where because our Food Sovereignty Alliance is 10 years old now, and we're farmer-led, but we're a whole of food systems alliance. And being farmer-led and being much more visible as a small-scale farming movement in this country is increasingly allowing us to come together. We have an annual gathering of something called Deep Winter Agrarians, where the small-scale farm, the first one was here 8 years ago, and it's happened every year on different farms around the country, and we get together and talk about the barriers to what we're doing and how to work together to solve them. We also have a food sovereignty convergence where we do that at a different time of the year. So and locally, we're more and more activated. We're trying to show kind of the campesino methodology of having dialogues on farms to share what our problems are and what people's solutions to those problems have been. And then by promoting that we're doing this on social media, then somebody in another region says, hey, our farmers should get together and do that. And the Agroecology Roadshow that my husband and I are taking very soon is to seed this model of the dialogues all the way up the east coast of Australia and give them the kind of skills and capacity to now keep doing it in all of their areas. And I'll just finish that by saying we've also, using a lot of agroecological research from the past 30 years, we've narrowed down, I guess, our delivery a bit, and we're using the language of peasantry in Australia in our movement, which is not common to Australia. There was colonization, and there were indigenous peoples, and then there was colonization, and there was never a peasantry. And in English, this has a very negative connotation as well of, it's just the poor people. There's no relationship like paysan, where it's to do with the land. And so we're having to claim that language in solidarity with the world's peasants. But what's helping us is saying to our farmer members, you have to make a decision if you want to be a peasant or if you want to be an entrepreneur. Because if you want to be an entrepreneur, you will fail. The capitalist system will destroy you because of your links to commodity systems. And so those who think that they will bring in inputs and they will send out food into commodity systems, but stay small or sort of weirdly medium-sized, are doomed to fail in this system. But a life of sustenance for your family and surplus that you share with your local community that helps you pay your bills is a beautiful life. And you set your growth limits on what size your property is and what size your community is. And you don't look beyond that. And you look to exit the commodity chains for inputs and for where you sell into. And that is helping our small scale farming movement gain an imagination around they came to the land because they want to farm like this, but they get lost in the capitalist system when they don't unshackle from it. So our mobilizations are going very well, slowly, because it's a difficult neoliberal government that we live with. But it's quite hopeful here in its own way.
Maude, die Frage zu den Blue Communities. Wie ist es euch gelungen, die Zusammenarbeit dieser unterschiedlichen Gruppierungen, zunächst lokal und dann global?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I want to go to one of Tammi's meetings. They sound wonderful. And Tammi, I think the notion of local production is incredibly important. I helped write the bylaw for the state of Vermont, excuse me, in the United States. And basically we allowed, excuse me, they brought in, this is just an old cold that's plaguing me. They brought in legislation to protect their groundwater. And that legislation allows the municipalities around Vermont to give priority to farmers, access to water to farmers who are farming for local production as opposed to export production. So we can actually marry the concepts of water and food production here in a way that's really supportive of what you're doing. And I just wanted to make that point. Blue Community started in Canada. About 11 years ago, we had a very right-wing government that not only was the government that opposed the human right to water, and I was working at that time not for money as a volunteer at the UN, but it was mortifying that my government was doing that. But they were also saying to municipalities in Canada, if you want federal funding for water infrastructure upgrading or new infrastructure, you have to go to a public-private partnership. And we were deeply opposed to that. So my organization, my then organization, a big social movement, joined with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the water workers, and we launched the Blue Communities Project to get municipalities to say, we're not going to accept public partnerships. We are going to maintain water as a public trust. So we set this in motion and went across the country and spoke to as many municipalities as we can, and we got our local communities working on this. And it was incredibly important. And the three pledges originally were to protect and promote water as a human right, to protect it as a public trust, so no privatization, and where there is clean, safe tap water coming out of your taps, which they are in Canada, except on First Nations communities, that you will do away with bottled water and you'll bring in a public education around public water. And I was in Bern, this happens to be Switzerland, was incredibly impressed. It took off like wildfire in Canada. There are many, many municipalities, dozens of them, including big ones like Montreal and Vancouver. I was in Bern when Chaput was the mayor of Bern, a lovely man, and I happened, because I was there fighting Nestle, I told him about Blue Communities. He said, I love it. Would you come back if we make Bern a Blue Community? So I came back the next year, and not only did Bern the city, but Bern the university, and then the Reformed Church all became Blue Communities. And then they set up this whole coordinator project. Lisa Krebs has been just incredible. It's moved to faith-based groups, schools, labor unions, and so on. And it's basically a pledge that you're aware that water is so precious. And I just want to remind us that separate from climate change, the way we're abusing and over-extracting water and mismanaging water is a crisis in and of itself. But then it started to spread to municipalities, mostly in Europe, and now it's spreading. Los Angeles just became a Blue Community, so it's spreading other places, and we have some in Latin America finally. But it really took off in Europe, where communities, people were fighting against the privatization of their water services. Berlin was really the big example. Berlin had made a terrible mistake doing this. The rates went up, the quality was down, there was a tremendous citizen involvement. They had a great big referendum. They forced the government to reverse its position. And then they said, we don't ever want to try that again. So we're going to become a Blue Community, and that is a pledge to be something, never to let this happen again. And we built and built and built this movement around the world, which is what you're doing with the peasants movement, the small farmers, regenerative agriculture movement. It is just incredibly important. And we built these relationships and these friendships that just lasted through so much. And basically what was so moving was the knowledge that you've taken a stand, and it's a beautiful vision where so much of us, we find this in our movements, we're fighting against something. And it's really lovely to put something forward and say we're fighting for something. And to have a vision that people can buy into. I'm just writing a new book on hope and activism. It's called The Little Book of Hope. lessons from a lifetime of activism. And I'm wanting to put out this message of hope. And I think it's very important that we articulate and visualize the world that we see and invite people to be part of it because they love it. I'm finding young people love it. We now have elementary schools wanting to be blue communities. And I'll just finish with this quick story. I spoke somewhere recently, actually before we were all locked up with COVID, so it was in person. This person came up to me after and she said, "I'm a blue community." And I said, "All by yourself?" And she said, "Well, why not?" She said, "I drink bottled water. I just drank my last bottle. I never knew anything about this. I'm going to teach myself everything I can learn about this issue. I'm going to get involved in our local Water Watch community group." She said, "We have one in our city. And I want to take this personally." And I thought, you know, my vision is to turn the world blue one community at a time. And I think doing this in lockstep with the food sovereignty movement is just an incredibly powerful concept. But it's the positive vision, and young people buy into this. Young people say this, you know, I don't want, you know, I worry that we're saying to young people, there's only 10 years left of the planet, right? And I think we have to have a positive vision of where we're going and what we can do.
Gut, es gibt noch eine Frage aus dem Chat. Ich komme immer noch nicht dazu.
Entschuldigung. Ja, und zwar ist die an Christian Zeller. Wie viel teurer werden Lebensmittel, wenn Landwirtschaft wieder arbeitsintensiver wird und faire Löhne und Arbeitsbedingungen bietet? Und da hat jemand anders dazugefügt noch, die Lebensmittel sind de facto, aber leider nur versteckt, schon heute mindestens doppelt so teuer, wie sie sein sollten, wenn man die diversen Schaden, Folge, Reparaturkosten, die die großteils industrielle Landwirtschaft mit einbeziehen und von den nationalen Budgets und Gesellschaft bezahlt werden, ohne Berücksichtigung der Bezahlung der Naturrechte.
Ja, ich kann jetzt keine Zahl liefern, wie teurer oder vielleicht sogar weniger teuer die Lebensmittel werden. Aber ich glaube, es gilt, ein paar Dinge zu überlegen. Wie setzt sich dann der Preis überhaupt zusammen? Wie ist überhaupt die Wertschöpfungskette organisiert? Es ist ja nicht so, dass landwirtschaftliche Produkte direkt von den Bäuerinnen zu den Konsumentinnen gelangen. Da sind ja sehr viele andere Akteure dazwischen geschaltet, die jeweils ihre Gewinne machen. Und das sind teilweise sogar die entscheidenden Organisationen, die die Gewinne machen. Also das sind die, ich habe da gestern schon darauf hingewiesen, die Nahrungsmittelbranche ist hochgradig konzentriert in etlichen Bereichen. Da haben wir dann so Konzerne wie Nestle, wie Unilever oder Cargill und so weiter und so fort. Das sind alles hochprofitable Organisationen, das sind hochprofitable Unternehmen. Das heißt, nur jetzt die Idee zu haben, wir erhöhen die Produzentinnen, die Preise für die Produzentinnen, für die Bäuerinnen und Bauern und lassen alles andere gleich. Das ist selbstverständlich keine Lösung. Das führt nirgendwo hin. Sondern ich glaube, wir müssen wirklich auch darüber sprechen, wie wir diese Konzerne, die auch gestern von mehreren Diskussionsteilnehmern angesprochen wurden, wie wir die entmachten. Es reicht nicht, eine solidarische Nischenproduktion neben der Mainstream, neben der bestehenden Produktion aufzubauen. Das ist sinnvoll, dass man das tut, aber es reicht nicht. Es geht darum, die Organisation der Lebensmittelproduktion, so wie sie jetzt existiert, von ihrem Kern her in Frage zu stellen. Und nicht von der auch von der Peripherie, aber auch vom Kern. Und das heißt natürlich, dass wir jetzt die Frage aufwerfen müssen, was soll ein Konzern wie Nestle? Ja, der hat ja schließlich auch den Hauptsitz in der Schweiz. Wie könnte auch eine Bewegung aussehen, die in der Lage ist, die soziale Nützlichkeit dieses Konzerns in die Diskussion zu rücken? Wer bestimmt darüber, wo er investiert, für was dieser Konzern investiert, wie er das macht, für wen und wer den Nutzen daraus zieht? Und wer sind die Akteure, die den großen Nutzen daraus ziehen? Also wer sind die Akteure, die das Geld, das Kapital, das Finanzkapital in Nestle platzieren, um über den Shareholder Value einen Return zu bekommen. Das heißt, da sind wir natürlich bei den großen Finanzunternehmen, bei den Fonds. Das heißt, wir müssen eigentlich vielgleisig verfahren. Wir müssen all diese Elemente gleichzeitig zur Diskussion stellen, nicht das eine Element wichtiger erachten als das andere. Und insofern, wie Raffaele gesagt hat, das, was in der UNO passiert, ist letztlich nur Ausdruck der Kräfteverhältnisse in den verschiedenen Ländern. Das heißt, es geht darum, dass wir in der Schweiz, in Deutschland, in Europa, in den USA, in Australien, in Südamerika, wo auch immer, direkt, konkret versuchen, die gesellschaftlichen, politischen Kräfteverhältnisse in all diesen Ländern zu verändern und einen Druck aufzubauen auf die Konzerne und letztlich auch nicht nur im Kleinen, sondern auch im Großen die Eigentumsfrage in den Mittelpunkt stellen. Das heißt natürlich letztlich die Existenz von Nestle als privaten Konzern in Frage stellen. Da führt kein Weg dran vorbei. Und dann stellt sich die Frage des Preises letztlich ganz anders, ja? Nachher für die Konsumentinnen, ja? Also, und da bin ich nicht mal so sicher, ob bei einer besseren Bezahlung der Produzentinnen und Produzenten dann automatisch die Preise für die Konsumentinnen dann sehr, sehr im gleichen Maße steigen oder ob wir, wenn wir sehr viele Zwischenorganisationen, Unternehmen rausnehmen und die praktisch auf Gemeinnützigkeit umstellen würden, ob dann überhaupt noch höhere Preise anfallen würden. Das bezweifle ich.
Und diese Fragen zu stellen, ich schließe nochmal an meine eigene Frage an und damit würde ich, glaube ich, auch das Panel abschließen wollen, wären die sozialen Bewegungen in ihrer ganzen Unterschiedlichkeit, also die Bäuerinnenbewegung, die Klimagerechtigkeitsbewegung, die Wasserbewegung und viele andere Bewegungen, die sich aktuell mit sozialen, aber auch ökologischen Fragen beschäftigen. Möchte da aus dem Kreis jetzt noch jemand was zu ergänzen, sonst würde ich langsam zum Abschluss kommen, auch wenn es noch ganz bestimmt viele Fragen gibt, auch aus dem Chat.
Vielleicht da kurz noch 2 Sätze. Also das, denke ich, ist ein ganz wichtiger Punkt. Es geht darum, auch zu diskutieren, wie wir Prozesse, wie wir Diskussionen, wie wir Dialoge in Gang setzen können, wie diese verschiedenen sozialen Bewegungen, die Bewegung gegen Wasserprivatisierung, Bewegung von Kleinbäuern und Kleinbauern, Bewegung für den ökologischen Landbau, Bewegungen auch von Konsumentinnen und Konsumenten und beispielsweise auch die klassische Gewerkschaftsbewegung in einen Prozess hineinbringen. Also beispielsweise, um es zuzuspitzen, weil es sehr brennend ist, was machen wir mit der Fleischindustrie? Die in vielerlei Hinsicht, das haben wir gestern gehört, letztlich gesundheitsgefährdend ist, ökologisch zerstörend ist. Eigentlich müssten wir direkt die Forderung aufstellen, wir wollen diese Fleischindustrie, so wie es jetzt existiert, zerstören, also praktisch auflösen. Ja? Wir wollen die runterfahren, wir wollen sie downsizen. Das geht aber natürlich, und gleichzeitig müssen wir aber, und das scheint jetzt paradox zu sein, gleichzeitig müssen wir aber auch die Interessen der Beschäftigten, die dort oftmals unter schlechten Arbeitsbedingungen arbeiten, verteidigen. Das scheint auf den ersten Blick ein Widerspruch zu sein, aber wenn wir diesen Widerspruch annehmen, können wir beginnen, einen Dialog zu starten zwischen den Beschäftigten, die dort arbeiten, den Konsumentinnen und natürlich den Bäuerinnen. Aber ich glaube, so etwas, gerade in europäischen Ländern wäre das eine sinnvolle Forderung zu sagen, wir wollen die Fleischindustrie radikal downsizen, radikal runterfahren, konvertieren. Das ist nicht ein längerer, größerer Prozess. Ich glaube, das müsste man wirklich, ich glaube sogar, dass eine Forderung auch durchaus in einem gewissen Sinne populär sein kann, ja? Dass man die Fleischindustrie wirklich offensiv in Frage stellt.
Tammi, du als Bäuerin und Tierhalterin, wäre das ein gangbarer Weg? Dann darfst du das Abschlussstatement hierzu, wenn die Übersetzung durch ist.
I think Probably I would echo something Maude said earlier about fighting for rather than against. Before I became a farmer, I spent a lot of time advocating against the industrial meat system in particular. I was a vegetarian for a decade, and I spent a lot of time fighting against, and I found it very wearying. And I think it was much harder to be an activist whose full focus was on fighting against. And that is a large part of why we came to farm for. And so I would say the best place for us to put our energies, which is not to say there's not a time to fight against, and we do it in our UN meetings and all of these things all the time. But I think if you can invest the majority of your energy into working and fighting for, we could have more small-scale farms until the old ones become obsolete. Because if you actually had a choice between meat from my farm and something from the sheds, then you would choose this. But not everyone has that choice. So we have to literally grow more of it like this. We need more farmers on the land, not less. And we need to farm and work for something positive. And I'll just finish with the idea of active optimism. You know, I love that Maude is working on hope. And I love the idea of active optimism, where we call ourselves active optimists because we are active in our own optimism. We help make it come true, the future that we're trying to fight for. And that's, I think, what I would finish with.